This week's redesign will look at an intersection in Hamilton, Ontario. And for those that don't know, Hamilton is a city of over 500,000 people, approximately 60 kilometers southwest of Toronto. For those that do know Hamilton, you won't be surprised to hear that this got me thinking about one-way streets. So before we get into a redesign, I wanted to talk a little bit about one-way streets in an urban context. One-way streets generally come in two varieties: the small local street, used when streets are too narrow or for traffic calming, and large arterials, used to reduce congestion and move cars through as quickly as possible. Examples of these in Toronto would be Shaw, and for the other one, Adelaide or Richmond. The first example is great at facilitating walkable and bikeable communities. Narrow streets cause vehicles to drive slower, and changing the one-way direction periodically prevents cars from using the area as a thoroughfare. Since this promotes low car volumes and low speeds, little cycling infrastructure is really needed. Cyclists can feel safe taking the whole lane, and a contraflow lane can allow cyclists to move against traffic. Special modal filters can be used to allow bikes through the areas where one-way direction changes. The second type of one-way street is a completely different story. Large arterial streets are sometimes made one-way because it can significantly improve traffic flow. Without typical left turns across an opposing direction, less intersections are needed and traffic is less likely to back up. While this might sound great from a traffic perspective, it ends up with many lanes of high-speed traffic, often zooming through the middle of a bustling urban area almost like a mini highway. The larger the speed differential between vehicles and active modes like cycling and walking, the more dangerous, unpleasant, and downright hostile it is for those active modes. Ultimately, it makes designing safe pedestrian and cycling spaces essentially impossible. The question really has to be asked: does this form of one-way street really have a place in an urban environment? How much more space can we give back to people if we could convert these streets into two-way traffic? Let's keep this in mind as we look at this week's example. The intersection we will be looking at today was suggested by Matt Pinder, a traffic engineer and one of the most knowledgeable people in North America that I know of regarding designing better spaces for active transportation. I'll link his blog that I would highly recommend you check out. The intersection we will be looking at in this video is York and Bay in Hamilton. Here, a one-way street meets another one-way street, transitioning into a two-way street. There are a couple of things I wanted to point out. First is how complicated design like this becomes when we don't adopt protected intersections. Bikes coming from the east have to merge across traffic to get to special turn lanes. Turning cyclists in many directions are given this small area to wait, but it's shared with cyclists moving through and has no protection from passing vehicles. Second is that Hamilton's solution to bike infrastructure on one-way arterials is often bi-directional cycle paths on the left side of traffic. While this makes sense on the surface, two-way cycle tracks really need to be used only when there are very few driveways or intersections. Turning vehicles will have a hard time seeing cyclists in both directions, and it can lead to some very dangerous conflict points. This video from the Rambling Hamiltonian shows just how many driveways and intersections exist along these one-way routes. Particularly with high one-way speeds, there are dangerous conflict points. It's highly recommended that if these are used, any intersections or driveways use raised crossings so that drivers have to slow right down and be aware of their surroundings. In the redesign, we will try to address these issues by converting to two-way streets and making the intersection protected for cyclists and pedestrians. Since we've done a few of these on this channel, I've gone ahead and skipped right to the design. Check out my first video for more details on how we would get to this design. First, let's look at how we changed the road directions. In the north, we removed the right turn lane going north, but otherwise we've left the two lanes of traffic and just shifted things over a bit to accommodate the bi-directional travel. We were even able to add a significant buffer for cyclists in the northbound approach. Going east, I removed one lane of traffic to give some extra buffer to the cycling tracks, and I kept the median because these really help to slow left-turning traffic. Going west, I was easily able to keep all 3 lanes and add a buffer space for cyclists and again keep the median. Creating the protected parts of the intersection was then pretty easy, with the only unique element about the intersection being that the roads are not perfectly 90 degrees from each other, but that didn't make much of a difference. As an aside, if you want more details about how you would navigate an intersection like this, there's a great Bicycle Dutch video that I'll link to. To show how much more challenging this would have been if we had kept the one-way streets, I'll take a stab at designing that as well. So this looks a bit odd, and I'm sure I did not represent many of the angles you would need for this correctly, but let me explain the approach here. Because you will have cyclists going in both directions on the west side of the intersection, and vehicles are moving at fast speeds here, the cycle path should be raised so that vehicles have to slow right down and ensure they can see cyclists in both directions. In order to do this safely, I've had to set the cycle path back significantly from the intersection so that a vehicle could make their turn, then have a waiting area to yield to cyclists and pedestrians. In doing this, I've had to cut into the existing lands that exist on these corners, which is likely not owned by the city. This all makes this a much larger and more complex infrastructure project than if we just had two-way traffic, and I still think the last design is likely much safer. So that's it for today. If you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe, and hit the bell so you get notified of future videos. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.